Welcome to Into the Falls, a Gravity Falls podcast. I'm Mary, and I know lots of things.
I'm AJ, and I know nothing.
This is a podcast where I guide AJ through the wonderful weirdness of Gravity Falls, my favorite show that he has never seen.
If you're a new arrival like me, or looking to relive some crazy summer memories, come with us, and let's dive into the falls. Hey ladies, fellas, and the people who don't give a fuck. It's AJ, and I thought the podcast pantry was finally cleared out with our latest episode, but it turns out I was wrong. Welcome to the Into the Falls from the cutting room floor moment. So back in episode 14, we had a great discussion with our guest, Abby Kirby, about media, fandoms, and her work as a fan scholar. That was unfortunately too long to include in the episode. So now it's here for your listening pleasure, because it's too good to let it go to waste. Hope you enjoy it, and stay tuned for episode 19.
18.
On Land Before Swine, which is in the can as I record this. No podcast pantry for this guy. Alright, see y'all soon.
When I was a kid, I thought I wanted to be like a singer or an actress or just like famous. And now it's just like, as long as I can talk about film and write and engage with this content, I'll be good. It's just so not what I ever expected when I was younger.
I definitely have a theory that everyone has like their origin story media. You might not realize what it was until you are a little bit older, but there is that moment where you see something on TV or you read a book and that just kind of alters your whole perspective, whether because it is able to transport you somewhere where you feel safe, whether because it sparks a new interest in you, or because it helps you get through any kind of difficult time, or even just the process of growing up. It's really fascinating the way that we form our identities and we form our paths simply because we found something that was meaningful to us. And it's often like the thing you least expect.
I kind of find it funny that both of y'all kind of had the light bulb moment where you watch these pieces of media and suddenly everything changes. I feel like for me, it was actually more like they planted seeds in me, which later fostered these big interests that I have. I don't know if I've mentioned it on the pod before. I think I have, but I'm part of the furry fandom.
You've mentioned it before.
And so a bunch of people point to Disney's Robin Hood as like their inception point. I mean, it's kind of the same for me. I had the 1999 Masterpiece Collection VHS as a kid. It was in my regular rotation of tapes that I'd watch. It was like that, Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius, and Toy Story, watching that, and I guess catching all the Disney Afternoon classics on Toon Disney as a kid. I mean, I sort of traced that with metal music as well. My dad would play me Evanescence's first album, Fallen, in the car on the way to school regularly. It was like in the regular rotation, along with NSYNC and stuff. Come high school, I get really into metal music, and it's now like one of the big three that I listen to. I just find it interesting that for me, it's like these seeds that were planted in me, whereas with y'all, it was like, oh, now everything changes. The branching timeline that you mentioned.
So what exactly does a fan studies scholar entail?
So fan studies is the academic study of fans and fan culture, but it's also an interdisciplinary field, meaning that anybody can join it regardless of the degree they have, or really even if they have a degree at all. It just involves looking deeply into something you care about and doing the research. It's majority made up of communications scholars, so our whole focus is to think about the ways that people talk to each other. What are the platforms fans use to communicate? What are some of the cultural habits that come with different fan groups? What are their traditions? What are their meeting spaces, digital or physical? But then we also just act a little bit like film scholars sometimes, and we break down media for its outside themes, less about the technical creation of what goes into it, but more about how, like, hey, Marvel movies are just all about capitalism type of like really obnoxious film bro stuff. But the nice thing about fan studies is that it validates all forms of media and it validates all interests. So we look into everything. We study music, we study anime, we study furries. We kind of look at everything and try to say, what is happening that makes our connections to media and to pop culture and to fiction so powerful, and how can we use that to take a deeper look at our world, think about where it has beauty, think about where it has flaws, and think about how we can use our interests to do better.
Would you say there's something that sets the Gravity Falls fandom apart from others?
Absolutely. Like, in the years I've been doing fan studies, and in the years that I've even been a teacher of the fandom and fan fiction classes, the Gravity Falls fandom is weird in like the best way, though. I have never seen a group of fans in so long be so ultimately dedicated to breaking down every single piece of the story. Just being in the Gravity Falls fandom during its heyday, I just remember everybody was looking for details and everything all the time, and that was really reminiscent of shows like Lost and Twin Peaks that hadn't been on the air for a while, and suddenly we were getting this revival of really intense fan culture through this. But I had also never seen, up until this point, a show involve its audience as much as Gravity Falls did. Like, hands down. Everything from the secret codes to hiding things in the background to all of the games and companion texts they would release for the show. I had never seen such interesting harmony and respect between fans and producers, that meaning was simultaneously being made by both groups. Usually it's just the fans responding to whatever the creators do, and occasionally getting to, in some way, influence the course of the story. But Gravity Falls was really a community effort for every single person who was involved with it. From just casually watching to diehard fan to artist or writer on the show, it was absolutely so involved. And I think that really sets the stage for what television should be moving forward. That producers should be able to look at Gravity Falls as an example of how to show respect for your audience and give them a space to be fully a part of the story. And I think that was what was really cool about Gravity Falls.
Yeah, that's a great point, because if you listen to the episode commentaries, which AJ is not allowed to do yet because they spoil things, but they talk about like how aware they were of the audience response once it really picked up steam, and once everybody was theorizing about every little thing and trying to pick out these details and figure out what it all meant. Probably mentioned this on the podcast before, but I remember when an episode would air, I would make sure I had the TV on like a minute or two beforehand, and I would like just sit on the couch. I'd be like scrolling through Tumblr on my phone until it started to air, and then I would turn my phone off and basically throw it across the room so that I wouldn't have any distractions, and so I could just watch the TV, and because I knew that something was going to be important. Even if it wasn't what we thought, there was always a possibility that something big was going to happen. Even if the episode didn't play it like something big, we would just see something and be like, oh, that relates to this. And so that means that this is going to happen, and that this character is actually doing this, and that it was just such an experience.
It really was. I'm sorry, AJ. I feel bad for people who are watching the show now who don't get to have that community experience that we did. Because I was kind of the same way. Mostly, like, my fan ritual started in season 2 because I was still in high school and I had, like, after-school clubs and stuff like that. So I would often miss an episode and have to watch it later. But when I was in college, I had that freedom, and like my friends and I like figured out how to like rig ourselves onto Disney XD through my laptop, and we would sit down and I would do the same thing where we would like have everything ready to go about 10 minutes beforehand, and I would just sit, I would take out my phone, I would prepare myself for what was going to happen, and then from the moment that 7 p.m. 7:30 slot would hit, I would just immediately set it down and just become absorbed into watching the show. But then when we get to commercial break, then I would be like back on Tumblr ready to engage with whatever was happening, because it was just such a vibrant time to be a fan, really, of anything, but especially for Gravity Falls. That was just like, I think out of all the fandom communities I've been a part of and out of all the fan communities I've researched, I think genuinely is some of just the most collaborative and exciting thing to be a part of every other week for something new.
Every other week if we were lucky.
Yeah.
It was such a lightning in a bottle thing because I feel like no other show that I've been into has done this. Like, AJ and I met around the time that DuckTales started, the reboot. It was only a year and a half after Gravity Falls ended, but so much of the industry had changed. Like, we were pretty much fully switched over to streaming by that point. So it was airing on cable, but every time they advertised it, they said, like, new episode drops Monday or whatever. And they would always say the episode is going to drop, not it's going to air on this date at this time. It's going to drop on Monday, which means it's going to be available at like midnight Pacific time and you can just watch it whenever. It wasn't that communal thing where we're all sitting down at the same time and like waiting for it to come on. You just do it on your own time.
Now you're thinking like a fan studies scholar, Mary. You should get involved. But you're absolutely right that streaming has changed the way that we've interacted with television. And one thing it has done as well, it creates like this extra accessibility where you can just watch anytime you're ready, on the go. You don't need to pay for cable, which is becoming more and more inaccessible to the general public. It also, for fans, has just removed that element of knowing that there are other people who live miles and miles away from you doing the exact same thing you are. And that's just like a really special mindset to be in.
So like now we're not all reacting at the same time. So like new episode of DuckTales comes out, you watch it whenever you can, and then you go into like the tag on Tumblr just to see if enough people have also watched it to really gauge that response. We were also making theories and like guessing what things meant because that was also a very serialized show, but it wasn't that sense of like we're all reacting to it in real time. And then it's the same with like streaming shows. The example I keep going back to is the She-Ra reboot, which like had a huge fandom while it was on and obviously still has fans. Everything still is going to have some fans. At least in my circles, it feels like we don't really talk about it that much anymore, whereas with Gravity Falls, it just has this life after death. It wasn't just the show. It wasn't just the story and the characters and just how good it was. It was the collective experience that really made it what it was. That's kind of why I started this podcast. I wanted to see the perspective of someone who wasn't there, who didn't have that experience and was just like watching this show years after the fact, basically in a vacuum, and just responding to it removed from that context. We have been excluding AJ from this conversation. I'm sorry. Do you have anything?
No.
That's okay.
No, it's great. Y'all are putting out some really great points, and it's really interesting to hear all of this experience that you guys are relating and just sort of trying to relate it in my mind to stuff that I've experienced, because I haven't been in that many, I guess you could say, media fandoms in my life. It just never really was a part of what I was doing, really. Even the stuff I like I was big into YouTube in high school and stuff like Smosh and everything that Ray William Johnson was doing. Never really engaged with fans, never really talked about it. I would just really enjoy the videos and just make them a part of my daily routine. Maybe even stuff like Bone, the comic book. My only real experience with that was just getting the books at book fairs at my school, reading them, just being absorbed by the story, and then that was kind of it. I don't think it was really until I really got big into social media after high school was where I really started to engage in fandom and discover new friends in fandom and just really start building this cultural experience that I don't know if I can live without at this point. Basically, with the advent of social media and streaming, fandom is like a requirement. It's like something that you gauge along with your ratings and your advertising money. It's like, how big is this fandom? I guess you could say that's another thing that Gravity Falls really pioneered was executives now look at fandom along with all the other metrics and it's like, okay, this is another way that we can judge how well our show is doing.
To say that executive producers and all the big wigs who work for the mouse look at fandom is simultaneously true and not true because they don't necessarily understand what popular fandom is. And that's ridiculous, but then we have to remember that these are probably old dudes in their 60s.
Who don't want to say gay.
Who just who don't want to say gay. But we see that with other shows like The Owl House, which have like a massive fandom following and are incredibly popular, but due to the way that Disney makes decisions about when to air shows, how to air them, makes decisions about merchandise, they are totally responsible for the fact why it wasn't doing successful in their eyes. Not because there wasn't a fandom there, because there was and is a fandom there. And I think out of all the animated shows on TV at this moment, The Owl House has the closest experience to being in Gravity Falls, that you can obviously see what fans are up to, that they are leaving like little hints and ideas for the fans to pick up as you go. Like they're using the same formula, obviously, because Dana Terrence worked on Gravity Falls and they have Alex Hirsch running around the office and being a gremlin all the time. My hope and my goal for the future of media and with fan studies is that, in particular, not to toot my own horn here, I think what we do as fan scholars is vital to the entertainment industry, and that more attention to what we do should be given so that these executive producers can make better decisions about who their audience is, how they are engaging with material, and what they can do to better ensure success instead of just doing things because they think it will save them money or because they think it's the future. Like, fans are very particular, and fans of specific things like to operate in specific ways. Fans have culture, and if you change that culture or try to influence it in any way, that is a really good way to like kill your TV show. You have to leave it the way it was because of the communal, even dare I say, the ritualistic nature of fans.
When AJ said that like he didn't get involved in fandoms like at all, he and I are just kind of going back to where we were when the show was airing. I'm talking about like, oh, I remember when this episode aired and this is what I thought of it and this is how the fandom responded to it. That's kind of like a less structured version of what Mystery Shack Lookback is doing, because they are like painstakingly recreating the fandom experience. It's such a weird experience to like go back and really like, we're not just rewatching the show, we're thinking about where we were. I was watching this episode, Bottomless Pit, last night and just laughing my ass off and thinking like, I have missed watching this show so much. And I miss the days when we were still getting new episodes, however slowly they rolled out. We still didn't know what was going to happen next.
I'm like really wearing my fan studies hat today. You're definitely pointing towards something that we talk a lot about, which is how does fandom create nostalgia? But focusing just on TV, I'm actually drawn to a book called Time on TV by Paul Booth, who happened to be my graduate thesis advisor. And the thing I love about that book is that he just kind of openly says, like, here are the ways that television is time travel, both in the ways that, like, the plot of the story works, like how characters move through time with flashbacks and flash forwards and all sorts of goofy little things that TV gets to do. But then just to say, like, yes, you yourself can use television and use any type of media as time travel. It does allow us to go back and reflect and re-experience in different ways. Like, I know that when Gravity Falls was still on, and like I think the year following it, I had probably seen the show like 50 times. And now that it's like several years later, I've noticed that I'm actually abstaining from watching it. Like, I am holding myself back because I know that every single time I revisit it, I want it to have that newness. I want to have that moment of, I forgot how fantastic this was. So I would kind of manipulate that sense of time. And I think we all do as fans in some way.
That's really what this podcast has been doing for me, having to rewatch the episodes in order. The reason I wanted to do this is because I never rewatch shows in order unless I'm showing it to someone else. So I'm like, okay, I need to find someone who hasn't seen Gravity Falls, and that's how I'm gonna rewatch this show. And so I'm just going like months without having seen this particular episode, and like Bottomless Pit. And the same thing happened with Boss Mabel last time. Like, yeah, I remember that joke, I remember that line. But then, like, it's like seeing it for the first time. I remember it, but also, like, I don't spend my time thinking about it. And I haven't seen it in a while. So I'll remember a joke, like, a split second before they say it. And I just have this reaction, like, I forgot. Like, I remember the joke, but I forgot how funny it was.
It's, yeah, definitely the tension between memory and real time. Things are always, like, no matter how much we try to remember them, they are always different and altered in our memory. So when we pit those two things against each other, it creates a really fun experience.
Watching this has kind of been the inverse of like you're watching Titanic and like you see the iceberg and you're like, just go around it.
It is so special especially because like when Gravity Falls was airing, I went from that huge transition from being like a high school junior, and it ended when I was a college sophomore. So there was like a really huge life change in there that involved me having to make new friends and move away from home and deal with all of these things that were difficult for me because I notoriously hate change. Change is
me too.
Bad. Change is so bad. But then to also like think about all the fantastic memories that came with it. I was at an anime convention a few weeks ago, like my first anime convention since the pandemic. So I was like all super hyped up. And there was like this huge incident where the hotel I was staying at like decided they were going to tear down their skywalk and just not inform anybody about it. So if you opened the door, it would just lead to a gaping hole of nothing. Kind of scary. So my best friend and I were going to walk across the street to the convention center and then get to our other friend's hotel room and hang out there. And I had like just worn regular clothes, but I was like, I need to wear my Dipper hat because I always wear it at conventions. The bad news is that this was Milwaukee in February. Wind's blowing, it's crazy cold, and at some point in the journey, without my knowledge from like walking 5 minutes across the street, I lost the hat. And I was just in absolute disarray because I had bought that in September of my freshman year of college. And to show where I am now, I was 18 at the time. I am 26 now. So I've had that thing for a good long time, like 8 whole years, and it was just gone. And I noticed it was gone, and I was freaking out. Like, I was sobbing. I was running around looking for it. I was, like, begging all of my other friends, like, please come look with me for it. Like, we got to try to find it somewhere. Like, it's got to be somewhere in the streets of Milwaukee. And it was not found. Like, I called every single number I could with the convention, and I had some very unpleasant interactions with convention staff who were wondering why I was freaking out about a hat. It was just horrible, and I eventually just at like 11:30 at night gave up and went back to my hotel room, and one of my friends walked me back, and as I was sobbing, she was like, I know that it was special to you, but I am missing the details as to why. And I just looked at her and I was like, it has been with so many things through me that it feels like quite literally ingrained into my DNA. It represents my whole journey from college to where I am now, like that process of graduating twice, getting 2 different degrees, becoming a student teacher, working with kids, doing all of these things. And the fact that it is gone is incredibly distressing. But I think most importantly, it signals that moment that I talked about earlier, that light bulb moment when I knew my life was going to be different because of Gravity Falls. It symbolized that sudden shift in the timeline or whatever happened, and losing it was just ultimately like distressing. And if you can't tell by my voice, I'm still distressed about it. I did replace the hat, and it will go on all sorts of new journeys with me and hopefully fill that void. But it definitely, like, that was the first time where I said, like, I know so much about fandom. I have spent like the past 5 years intensely studying fandom, and in this moment it has finally occurred to me what fandom means emotionally. Like, to lose a piece of it permanently, just ultimately in that moment for me described why are we so obsessed with this thing? Why is it so emotionally impactful? And what does it actually symbolize in our larger lives than just, I liked the show, it got me through stuff. It is so deeply a part of who we are, how we re-experience memory, how we re-experience time, do all of these things. If you are a fan and you love something dearly, regardless of if you loved it as an individual or as part of a community, it is so much a part of you that it's like, it's almost world shattering. And that's why I think fandom is ultimately so cool, because it takes moments like that for you to really put it all together and go, oh yeah, this is why humans are like that.
It's funny, talking about the episodes on this podcast, I will talk about, like, if I remember where I was when I first saw the episode or, like, what my response was. I think about that way more than I think about high school, like actually being in high school and those experiences. Like, if someone brings it up, I remember it, but I never think about it. And this is like, it doesn't make me nostalgic for high school. It just makes me nostalgic for this experience that happened to coincide with high school. This came out right after I graduated 8th grade, and it ended right before I graduated high school. I don't think about anything else from that time unless I'm like hanging out with a friend who I knew back then and we're talking about, and even then it'll just be like, hey, remember when you did this or when this happened. It's usually not something that happened at school. I don't think about, there's so many shows that position high school like it's the most important time of your life, and it definitely can feel like that at the time, but then like you graduate and then you like immediately are like, what school did I go to? What class was I? What is that building?
What's going on?
Yeah. What? I don't know if it's just the kind of people we are, but I notice I don't really remember too many details about like the high school experience itself as well. I don't remember exactly my teachers' names or some of the classes I've been in. I wasn't totally active in high school. That might be a factor as well. It is what it is, but I do remember dubstep. Like, play me some Skrillex or some freaking XIV or Deadmau5 or any of that time when I was big into electronic music, and it just takes me back to being a kid during that time. All those experiences, like staying up late, doing homework, just blasting dubstep. I feel like when you rewatch the show and you have those kinds of reactions that you have now, Mary, you mentioned, it's almost like you're remembering watching the show, and you're remembering these jokes, and the reason like it feels so weird is because the fandom experience was just so ingrained into your watching the show. Maybe you heard that joke, and then maybe somebody on Tumblr was like, that was the funniest thing ever. Oh, here's another joke just like this. Having that communal aspect is just so a part of the experience. You're just like, you remember that and want to go back to that, as well as speaking that stuff into the ether just helps me to process these thoughts. You know.
What is life if not just throwing thoughts into the ether?
What is a podcast if not just throwing thoughts into the ether? That's why we have this.
Yes.
Just
my gosh.
Boomeranging ideas. Hoping they come back to you one day.
That is absolutely my response to this. Like, I can pinpoint. There are episodes that we haven't gotten to yet, but I remember, like, there's one line in this episode that's coming up next season that I remember, like, being like, oh my god, I have to talk about this, and I immediately went on Tumblr as soon as the first commercial break was done. I'm like, oh my god, this character said this, I can't believe it. I have a very specific example in my head that I will definitely mention when we get to that episode, because it is so ingrained with my experience with that episode and that season, and I am so excited for season 2. We went a long time without recording. The first real hiatus was between Summerween and Boss Mabel, so that's kind of the one that we accidentally recreated. We're not talking about Boss Mabel this week. We're talking about Bottomless Pit. We've been recording for almost an hour and have not actually talked about the episode.
Not even talked about.
Well, we had
the
so many interesting things to say about our lives and who we are as people and how we became who we are.
That's the purpose of doing podcasts like this. I mean, yes, part of it is because you just get to talk like mindlessly and someone out there will listen to it. But the other part is that, if I can borrow from scholar Abigail DeKosnik, fans have cultural memory, and we are looking constantly for ways to preserve that. Our own thoughts and feelings about what it was that we saw, or that we felt. That is specifically what podcasts like this do, is that it acts as a time capsule for new fans, old fans. Somebody's going to stumble across this podcast in 2 years to understand what that culture was and get a piece of it without having to actually have been in that time with that community.
Well, the fact that it's been so long between recording and actually releasing the episodes, it mirrors kind of the same thing, the same experience I have rewatching Gravity Falls, because I will like forget that I said something or forget that we made this joke, and then I'll hear it basically for the first time and just think it's the funniest thing because I forgot that it happened. So it's all new to me again. We've been spending an awfully long time just sitting in this black void telling stories. This has been Into the Falls. You can find me at Mabel Page Pines on Twitter and Instagram. That's Mabel, P-A-G-E Pines. I'm also May Page on YouTube and Film Knife on Medium and WordPress. That's where I post my film reviews and essays, editorials, etc. You can follow the show on Twitter at The Falls Cast, all one word, and Into the Falls Podcast on YouTube. And I will hand it off to AJ.
This podcast is hosted and produced by Mary McKeon and AJ Sanchez, and our theme song and some of the music is by Kevin MacLeod. Oh, and follow me on Instagram. and I make YouTube videos sometimes. Unca AJ. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, trust no one!